Okay, I'm all phlegmy because I just ate. Of course, I would start with that. Oh, hi. And of course, here's the thing. Mercury rules the voice. That's one of the first. That's one of the interesting things that I kind of learned here. That he rules. Of course, he rules the tongue and speech, but he rules the voice. And I just ate this really great cheesy alambre thing that they make, and of course now I'm going to be coughing and hawking all the whole time. But that's okay because we're ready for. So we're talking about Mercury in traditional astrology. And what I thought I wanted to kind of do in order to make this really interesting, especially because Mercury is really interesting, is I wanted to kind of look at some of the lesser understood or rather kind of maybe buried aspects of him in relation to some of these charts. And I'll let you know what I mean in a second. As a matter of fact, let me just start the slide. Oh, I have to go. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me just start the slide. Okay, good. So I want to go here first. I want to look at these things. So some of these things I think are really fascinating. Neutral and hermaphrodite, of a nature open to all of the planets and signs, takes on the characteristics of the planet to whom it is joined. So the thing about Mercury is that Mercury is a servant. He's the messenger, but he's also the ruler of servants. So we see here nature open to all of the planets. That's where I got this. This is from Alcabisi. Male with the male ones, female with the female ones. We're going to look at a chart where that's the case. Nocturnal, because what does this maybe imply about transgenderism, right? About the transgender nature. I mean, I don't know necessarily if you can see transgenderism in the chart. You can see variation, and of course, that's one of the things that Mercury represents. So, male with the male ones, female with the female ones, nocturnal. Okay, now this one is wrong. Nocturnal ones with the nocturnal ones, diurnal with the diurnal. Remember that Mercury is, when he is oriental, which means he's going to rise above the horizon before the sun, he is then oriental. When he's oriental, he's diurnal. When he's behind the sun and will rise after, he is nocturnal. So when he's oriental, he's diurnal. When he's occidental, he's nocturnal. And we will look at that with charts. So youth, younger brothers, children and youth, but obviously youth, one making computations, superior in all arts because he's skilled, an interpreter, clever, a geometer, so here's math, astrologer, here's astrology, augur, divination. So interesting that we see the sun for divination, but it looks like Mercury also. True expounder of things, inventor of music and a scribe. Oh, I'll see if I can get Mercury's chart in there. And I mean, not Mercury. Ooh, that was an interesting thing. If I can get Mozart's chart in there, and we'll see the Mercury influence of Mozart. A writer of history and of little joy, of loser provisions, giver and taker, right? So he's giving and taking, buying and selling. Deceiver, right? Because the tongue can be eloquent for truth and eloquent for deception. Unstable, obedient, able to endure, possessing little. And I thought that this was interesting over here, where they talked about, there we go, literature and philosophy and a gift of knowledge, arithmetic and geometry and the measure of higher and terrestrial things. That's something you see quite a bit in all of these texts that I looked at, is that Mercury is the ruler of terrestrial things, which means things of the earth. And that connects with, I don't know necessarily if it connects with Hinduism, but it connects with yoga. Because with yoga, the earth element is the root chakra, and Mercury and the Lagna is the ascendant, are the two planets that represent the root chakra, and that's the earth. So Mercury, and of course, Mercury is exalted in Virgo and is in domicile. It's the only planet who is in domicile and exaltation in the same sign, and that's an earth sign. So Mercury is about getting your earth thing together. So that's something that I never knew. Right? So that's something kind of new. Even the wisdom of the stars and prophecy and its declamation and rebuking. So that's something also I never knew. So that, or not never knew, but that's something I've been really giving completely to the sun. But obviously Mercury as the agent of speech is going to represent that as well. But it's even saying also there's something maybe more about that, because he's the agent of speech, but he's also, remember, the rational mind and the intellective mind. So he's how we process information and it comes out of the mouth. And so you would think on some level that the moon might be more involved with kind of maybe mediumship or prophecy and oracles or that kind of thing. But obviously it's all coming through the mouth. It's all coming from the tongue, right? It's all coming via speech, and that is Mercury. So that, in my opinion, is kind of an important thing. Let's see, good omens. So the reading of omens, right? That's the other part. The reading of any kind of divinatory method, right? You have to know how to read it. Boom, there we go. That's where also, so it's not just the speech. It's, I mean, if you're a medium, I guess it's the speech aspect, and maybe that's more solar. But if it's the learning how to use a method like tea leaves, like tarot cards, like an astrology chart, like geomancy, you have to know how to read that. So there we go. A good omen and hospitality and knowledge in matters, because Mercury is knowledge, and wisdom and obscure books. Obviously, Mercury is books. So, and rhetoric and eloquence or sweetness of speech and its quickness or the explanation of opinions. So it's just kind of continuing on in that vein. But if you come down a little further, we will see here writers and books and offices and the assessing of land and taxes. Why would you be the assessing of land and taxes? Anything that has to do with reading and writing and arithmetic, right? So the person that, and bookkeeping, right? Books or Mercury, we already established that. So any kind of bookkeeping or anything of that nature would also be Mercury. It's interesting. You know, I've got this Mercury on the ascendant, but it's in Sagittarius. And so that's always been one of the worst things. I got a job doing the bookkeeping, was as a receptionist and bookkeeper. And they said, you were great at everything but the bookkeeping. So I was great at all the Mercury things, except for when it came to keeping the books totally balanced. And rhetoric and eloquence, we were there, striving for position of place, and writers and books and offices, and the assessing of land and taxes, and slander. Here we are, Mercury hour. Mercury hour just started, baby. Okay, isn't that amazing? And he signifies a scarcity of joy and the destruction of assets, signifies assets and distributions and merchandise and business deals, and buying and selling, giving and taking and partnering. Let me say that again. He even signifies assets and distributions and merchandise and business deals, and buying and selling, giving and taking, partnering, affliction, burglaries and contentions, deception, lies, resentment, cunning, denials, and depth of counsel. So anything that's coming out of your mouth and anything in which you show skill. So anything in which you show skill, anything in which you are writing or reading, anything in which you are using your mouth, right? Or like I am right now. And he signifies combatants in hostility and losses and reckonings. One of the things that in the Orphic hymn to Mercury is they call him the father of competition, or he loves competition. He revels in competition. And that's never something, you know, I think of Mars as being competitive, right? We think of Mars because of war, right? But there's an aspect of Mercury that he loves gymnastics. So it's kind of it's the test of the skill is what they're saying. Now, one of the things Rob Hand said was that he found the Mercury and Jupiter signs to not be competitive. So isn't that interesting? To not be competitive, to just be interested in their own, in honing their own skill. And an excellent example of that is, you know, I was a music major, I was a voice major, and I had a very good friend who was a singer, and who was also a singer. We were voice majors together, and he came to San Francisco where I was living and stayed with us for a little while. And he was talking, they were like, oh, what was Antoine like in college or whatever? He goes, you know, Antoine was never really competitive. He was just really good. And that's, so I'm inclined to maybe stick with the Mars as competitive, right? Because Mars is inclined towards war, right? Mars is inclined towards contention. Mars is, and even all this me first stuff, I think that's interesting because don't we think of Aries as me first and kind of that Mars rushing forward? So it's interesting, you know, maybe over time some of these things have gotten more extricated, but some of these things sound like Mars, don't they? And that's what's interesting to me. So let's move on a little. So we were just here already with the neutral and hermaphrodite thing, nature open to all. And so that's what I'm really, this hermaphrodite aspect of him, this, they call it mutable and convertible, this mutable convertible aspect of him, right? The two planets that are mutable and convertible are the moon and Mercury, right? They take on, and if you remember from what, 2 weeks ago when we were looking at the Bonatti, he even talked about that. He talked about that in one of his considerations where he said that they take on or they become whatever the other planet that they're joining with is. So something to think about. Diurnal when oriental, nocturnal when occidental, we talked about that. His natural temperament is cold and dry. And then we've got, I keep moving this damn thing around. Youth and younger brothers. Can I make it smaller? I can't. I guess I can't. Well, I think I can. There we go. Youth and younger brothers. What an idiot. I've been rolling that thing around. Okay, servants and slaves. Servants and slaves. Knowledge, religious belief and wisdom. Do you remember when we did the 9th house and we found out that Mercury was the significator for faith? Which I thought was so interesting because, you know, when you think about rationalism, but it's about, though, it's about on some level debating through information, deciding what it is we believe, what our own personal precepts are. And that's what I think is really what it's talking about, is that it's basically with accepting faith or not accepting, it's how you weigh all the information before you. You see, and so your faith is kind of reflected not as much through Jupiter, which would represent more the kind of faith, which would be really pious and really obedient. Really, but that Mercury would be the faith itself. So this is something I'm interested, even in your own. I mean, if you want to, you know, say something about that yourself, if you're interested in kind of looking at it. But how Mercury, knowing that he's the rational mind, knowing that he's the intellect, right? So knowing that he's the processor of information, I think that's the main thing where he comes into with the, or comes to us with the with faith. So knowledge, and obviously also think about this time period, 1337, 20 or 1287. You know, actually Alcabisi is even earlier, right? So 9th century, 10th century. So religion organizes everything in culture. I mean, it still does in some countries, right? But religion is the main organizing principle in many of these countries. And so most of the important literature, right, because Mercury rules literature, is religious literature. So most of what people are learning, they're learning treatises, they're learning ancient treatises, they're learning ancient texts, they're learning scriptures, right? So they're learning with the Bible, or they're learning with the Quran, or they're learning with the Vedas. That's the whole Gurukul system of, you know, bringing a child through learning the Vedas, you know, into Vedic life, right? So this is, I think, maybe indicative of its time period, but it's something that we might want to look at. Remember when we also looked at the 9th house, it was the only house that we needed to update. In my opinion, it was the only house that needed updating. Intellect, literature and philosophy. Eloquence, rhetoric and speech, we just were over that. Business deals, merchandise buying. I was just basically extricating what we just looked at. Oops, let me go back. Okay, rulerships. Lying, slander, gossip, continuing, right? Continuing with the same ones. Arithmetic and geometry, nothing we haven't seen yet. Nothing we haven't seen yet or talked about. Okay, now here we come into the Mercury character. So somebody wrote in on Reddit a little while ago saying, what do you think is a technique that's overlooked that people should be looking at? And I said, looking at the planets based on their own specific significations instead of how they manifest behaviorally. So, or as opposed to psychologically behavior. So seeing how the planet, what the planet actually represents, completely separate from psychological behavior. And so here we come to the psychological behavior of the planet, right? The Mercury character. And so we kind of looked at this. Remember when we looked at body last week, when you're trying to look at physical characteristics, I included manner because they're included in the first house. So remember, once again, the first house is the body, but it's also your skill or talent or ability, your inherent talent or ability. And so, and also remember that Mercury is in joy in the first house, right? So that's the first house is the house of Mercury's joy. So that means remember that when a house is the joy of a planet, it means that the house supports the significations of the planet, no matter what sign the planet is in, right? The planet doesn't have to be in its own sign if it's in its joy in order to partake of its own significations, right? Venus, when she's in the fifth, she can be in Aquarius, she can be in Scorpio. She's going to have a good time in the fifth as per that sign, right? Because she and the fifth are one. The fifth is about enjoyment. Venus is about enjoyment. The fifth is about sex and fun. That's what she's about. So she's going to find that there. Same thing with Mercury. Mercury in the first, he can be in Pisces, but he's going to show that Mercury Piscean skill. He might be the best swimmer in the state. So think about, once again, we're kind of looking backwards a bit. We're retrograding. Oh, like Venus, we're retrograding into looking at next week. But think about, once again, that there, as far as Western astrology is concerned, or our astrology is concerned, the character and the physicality are connected. They're not separate. The same planet that shows you what that person is going to be like shows you what that person is going to look like. So with that in mind, subtle and political brain, the word subtle kept coming up. And I just love that because it's not something we think about, but it's connected to Mercury and trickery. And so that's, we've kind of lost this. It gets so watered down. As a matter of fact, we had another situation today where I was talking about Jupiter being substance and wealth, and they were like, no, Jupiter is like expansion. It's like, did you really just say Jupiter is about expansion? Did you give me this vague thing about this? And that's kind of what's happened. Everything has gotten so watered down that Mercury is just communication. And it's like, what did we just find out? We just found out Mercury is subtle and political and intellectual and cogitates and is an excellent discourse. So he's a logician. Learned. He would always be arguing with learning and discretion. Eloquence and speech. All of the things that we just talked about. Searcher into the mysteries. Searching into learning. Sharp and witty. Sharp and witty. Witty, right? So using their wit. And wit is another word for knowledge. Learning almost anything without a teacher, right? So this is somebody who's just, Mercury and curiosity. That's one of the main things I think of about Mercury is Mercury and curiosity. Ambitious of being exquisite in every sign. So here's this thing around skill. So we can say then, on some level, because, I was always really, really interested in Greek mythology, Greek and Roman, especially Greek mythology, and how Hermes is portrayed. He's the trickster. He's born, and one of the first thing he does is hide a cow from his brother Apollo. He plays tricks from out of the womb. He starts playing tricks, and so this issue of him being subtle, this issue of him being desirous to learn, of being skillful, being tricky, maybe lying, maybe there's this whole kind of shadow side. And I remember when I first started getting into astrology here, that there was lots of books. Of course, that was when what's her name, Liz Green, was really big. So this whole kind of Jungian astrology thing was huge. So I think even Liz Green is the one that wrote it, about Mercury the trickster. And if you're into the Jungian astrology, or you're into, I was really into Jung, and I did a Jungian 6 years of Jungian analysis, and And that's kind of where I started with astrology, but soon left it because I wasn't really interested. But Mercury is the trickster, and I think that's a shadow element of Mercury that's kind of coming in through the lines, reading through the lines, between the lines rather, is a liminal, and even Mercury himself is kind of liminal, a between the lines kind of thing, right? That's the subtlety, right? That's the subtlety. Mercury is between the lines. So he exists between the lines. Searches the mysteries and learning, sharp and witty, learning almost everything without a teacher, naturally of travel, exquisite in every science, naturally of travel, right? He was the ruler of travelers and roads. At least the god Mercury is. I didn't see these particular things there, but I do tend to include a lot of the things that they represent as gods, but you don't tend but that are left out sometimes in the astrology. He's the nature, you can see the nature of travel, but he rules travelers and roads, and seeing foreign parts, obviously, unwearied fancy, curious in search of any occult knowledge. Here we go, more germane to us. Able by his own genius to produce wonders, given so like a Thomas Edison, right? Given to divination and more secret knowledge. We just talked about that. And if he turned merchant, no man exceeds him in the way of trade or invention of new ways where to obtain wealth. One of the things about India, in my opinion, is, and it's something that diasporates even to this day, is what a mercantilistic culture it is. And mercantilist is MERCANTILISTIC, MERC, Mercury. Mercury and merchants, and everything about kind of, certainly here in America, most of the Indians, not in America anymore, but I'm in America, but I'm not in North America. Oh, I'm in North America, but I'm not in the United States. There we go. So in the United States, most of the Indians are either merchants, straight up merchants, own stores, own gas stations, blah, 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 own hotels, or they are engineers, software engineers, tech people. So there's even that element of the Mercury. So the two different aspects of this Mercury show up in the Indian, in kind of the Indian soul, in my opinion, that I see so much. There's just this, and business. I remember every time, two things I remember an Indian person said to me. Indians always are trying to get you to go into some business with them. And I said, what is that about? And he goes, you don't understand. He goes, when a man becomes friend with another man, it's important to pull money together, to do business together. Like doing business is an aspect of the friendship. And it would just happen all the time. Well, why not come to India and do some business? And it's like doing some business is an extension of saying, hey, you and I are brothers. You and I are down. So let's partner, right? We were just talking about how Mercury represents partnering. So let's partner. It's not intimate partnering like you would do with Venus, right? It's this other type of partnering, which is Mercury, where it's hand to hand. It's giving and taking. It's buying and selling. So I found that really interesting. Well, there has to be some money connected. And of course, that often ends up what? Being a major problem with these fucking relationships, and they end up getting, having all these issues. But it can go either good or bad. So we can get it when it's well placed, and then obviously we can make our own, shall we say, considerations when it's not well placed, right? Troublesome wit, frenetic, right? Disorganized thinking, unable to process the thinking, tongue and pen against every man. Oh, okay, so then we get malicious. Every man wholly bent to spoil his estate in time and prating. So, talks too much and doesn't do what they need. Trying nice conclusions to no purpose. Okay, goes off into pipe dreams that would never happen. A great liar, boaster, prattler, busybody. So then we get into gossiping and lying and false witness, and then getting into the wicked arts like black magic and necromancy. So then we get into not being smart, easy of belief, being gullible, not being smart. So this makes me think about QAnon. So gullibility is a negative Mercury trait. Being a mark for somebody's con. That's both sides of Mercury. Just from what I'm saying, what I'm understanding from here, I'm learning a lot about this. You don't really think about it, but the con man is Mercury, right? Because he's the subtle liar. And then the mark is too. because of course they're in a give and take, they're in a buying selling relationship. So the minute you get into a buying and selling relationship, hand to hand, give and take, you're involved with Mercury. Mercury is in the place. So pretending all manner of knowledge. Okay, so when you're fronting and you don't know it, cheating and thieving, right? So this is where we come to the connection of Mercury and Mars, right? When we've seen these Mercury-Mars connections, we've seen what I call the highwayman. We see the thief, the thief or the brigand or the ruffian, or the thug, the straight up thug. So Mercury can go either way. Let's see, no true solid learning, a trifler. So it gets into being not being smart. It also gets into being shallow, kind of mentally shallow or mentally superficial, right? A trifler, a mental, like you don't really have the ability to think deeply. If you prove a divine, then a mere verbal fellow, frothy of no judgment. We've certainly seen, matter of fact, we see that on fucking Reddit all the time. Easily perverted. So we've been seeing this negative Mercury on Reddit incessantly. No wonder I get so tired of it. Okay, now we move into the Mercury body parts. So what I thought was so interesting about this was that all three of the people that I was using when I got into body and especially about illness, memory, the brain, because of the brain, memory and imagination, because remember, Mercury is connected to the mind. And so it's all about the mind. The mind is the body part, is basically how they see it. They also know that the mind is what animates soul, mind is what animates the body. Soul through mind is what animates the body. So, and remember that the mind has two parts. It's got the lunar mind and the mercurial mind. It's got the lunar non-rational mind and the mercurial rational mind. And so through those two planets, right? So through those two planets, then we get what animates the body. And that's where thus memory and imagination and things that are connected to the mind become parts of the body for Mercury. Brain, tongue and vocal cords, nerves and sinews, hands and feet. Okay, so now we come into the infirmities, and I think it's kind of good to know these things. I learned something really interesting today on Reddit. I mean, not today, but a few days ago on Reddit, because I've never really gotten that deeply into kind of astrology of illness and decumbiture and all of that kind of thing. But he was, this one person was saying that another author was better than Lily, was more what's the word, correct, or more, just a better, I'm having a Mercury issue. So what was it, more accurate than Lily? And see, once I actually addressed him, he gave me the correct word. So he was saying that he thought that this author named Saunders was better than Lily at certain aspects that had to do with sickness and illness. And so I looked those things up, and I've included Saunders. He's in the next. What is this thing called? Mercury. What is this thing called? Slide. Thank you. Okay. Al-Khabisi says infirmities of the soul. We just talked about that, right? Horrible thoughts and the disquieted mind. So mental illness. So now when you're on Reddit and somebody asks, do you see mental illness in this chart? What are you going to look at? You're going to look at Mercury first of all, because this is the only planet that when they say, what is this planet's sickness? It's mental. It's in their mind. It's how they think. Horrible thoughts, disquiet of mind, doubts and the rest like. However, he signified the quality of mind according to his complexion and connection. His complexion and connection. Once again, if he's connected to something, it's going to affect him. So remember, I mean, we talked when we looked at the soul, and we looked kind of a little bit at infirmities of the soul. But we can see here, infirmities of the soul really are what they're talking about when they say infirmities of the soul is a technique, is an astrological technique. And so we would be able to astrologically figure out what the infirmity, what planet was the informating, or what planet was creating the infirmity, shall we say, or what kind of infirmity it might be, if indeed it was an infirmity. All vertigos, that's fascinating because it's in your head, right? It's from the dizziness in your head. So dizziness, so brain, mental, lethargies or giddiness in the head. There we go. Madness, obviously, so mental illness, either lightness or any disease of the brain. Any disease. So Mercury is the brain. Thesis. Let me see if I can find that one. Okay, thesis. Where is he? Corporature, sickness, thesis, 439. Oop. Consumption, lung disease, tuberculosis. Isn't that fascinating? Huh, I wonder what the connection is with that. Oh. Oh, shit. Hold on. Oh, I can't. I can't. What am I? Sorry. Where am I? Is it this screen? Which one is it? Oh, here. Bam. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so all vertigos, lethargies, and giddiness in the head. Where were we? We were at theses. All stammering. Now we get into imperfections of the tongue. Vain and fond imaginations. Now we get back to the mind. All defects in memory. Remember, so Mercury rules the memory. Hoarseness. Now we come to the voice. Hoarseness, dry coughs. We come to what's going on in the throat, in the voice box. Too much abundance of spittle. Oh my God, how did I start this class today? How did I start it? I started hawking up spittle. And the very first thing I said is, I just ate this thing, and now I've got all this mucus. Bam, too much abundance of spittle. All snaffling and snuffling, I do that all the damn time, in the head or nose, the hand and feet gout, dumbness, obviously more tongue stuff, tongue evil. Ooh, tongue evil. That could be fun. All evils in the fancy and intellectual parts. All right, so fancy meaning the mind, right? I fancy, what's your fancy? What do you fancy? In that particular, I would like this. So that's what it means in the fancy. Okay, now here we come to Saunders. And this is the author that Kid Cubby said was better. And so it's in all that difficult English, but I think it's going to be almost exactly the same. So mixed humors, remember, because Mercury rules mixtures, according to whom he is configurated. Same thing. Distraction of sense, madness, all vertigos, lethargy or giddiness in the head, right up there. Lightness or any disease of the brain. Physic. So now this is interesting. I don't know why tuberculosis is connected. Oh, respiratory. It could be Gemini and respiratory. Oh, hold on a second. What's coming in? I've had a dry cough for about a decade. Mercury and Virgo. Woo! Isn't that interesting? All right, and Virgo is a cold, dry sign. It's even a dry sign. So you had a dry cough. How interesting. Stammering and imperfections of the tongue. I'm just going to see if there's anything in here that wasn't in the other, because this is the one that he said was even more correct. Vain and fond imagination, all defects of the memory. Hoarseness, dry coughs. Superabundance of spittle, all snuffling and snuffling in the head or nose, the hand or foot gout, dumbness, tongue evil, all evils in the fancy, intellectual parts, suggestions of evil spirits, foolish and irrational conceits, troubled thoughts, stuffing of the pipes and organs of the voice, black jaundices. Now here's different. Black jaundices, wind in the bowels. Okay, farting, because wind, right? Mercury, remember, he's one of the trusty rulers of air. He rules Gemini. Lightness of mind, deliriousness, aridity of the tongue, swelling in the legs. That's interesting. Hands and fingers, swelling in the legs, hands and fingers. So extremities, right? So he's got the hands and fingers. But it's interesting that it's involved feet too, right? Because the feet gout, hand and feet gout was involved too. Very interesting. Okay, if you have any questions, obviously put them on in there. We're kind of doing a little quick trip through, and then I'm going to look at charts. So we're about maybe 2/3 through of all the things. This is super deep dive, right? I mean, this is exactly what we wanted to do, or I wanted to do. Let's see. So what kind of profession? So somebody says, I have a Gemini MC. What should I do for a career? Then what would we say? Preach. Be a preacher or a rhetorician or a teacher, mathematician. But see, of course, a lot of these jobs now, they aren't happening. So one of the things Mercury is a clerk. He's a bookkeeping clerk. He's a secretary, right? Because Mercury is a servant. He's a personal assistant. So that's something that we can be thinking about when we're thinking about Mercury professions. Business deals and the assessing and geometry and the managing and organization of a matter. All the people that do that assessing and geometry and the managing and organization of matter, they're working in corporations right now, doing exactly that. Guys that are really good at geometry and math, they're in the financial industry, or they're in the tech industry, creating those algorithms that turn everybody into white supremacists, right? Those are our Mercuries. And business is Mercury. So somebody, you're at college and somebody says, oh, what are you studying? I'm studying business. Mercury, there he is. Philosophy and allegory, and proverbs and writing and the knowledge of versifying, right? So that's a lot of that stuff tends to have the connection to religion, except for allegory. Well, even allegory, right? And especially the work of counting. So this is why Mercury was the ruler of astrology, in my opinion. It's because only the people that could read and write could do astrology. And not everybody could read and write. It was a minority of the people that could actually read and write. Not everybody was inclined towards learning, towards book learning, right? That's Mercury, book learning. You can be street smart, which is still Mercury, right? But just in a different milieu. But you can also be book smart. And they talk about that. Or you can have common sense, right? And Mercury is common, right? So those are all these. So what do we got? We got book smart, which is one, it's like a hierarchy of Mercury. We got the book smart, which is, or not a hierarchy, but the compartmentalization of Mercury. So we got book smart over here. We've got street smart over there. And then we've got common sense over here, right? Those are all things that are practices, Mercury practices, which if Saturn is complected to him in terms of work of number, it signifies the work of measuring land and real estate, right? Because remember, Saturn represents land, things under the ground and land, and real estate in the calculation and building and looms. Now, here's the thing. We also know now that Mercury with Saturn means that the mind is really good with difficult subjects, depending obviously on what's going on. The mind should be good at hard things, and that the mind should be good at dense and difficult calculations and dense literature and dense and difficult issues. And so why we see a lot of engineers who have Mercury Saturn, highly rational, highly rational, not particularly emotional. Mercury Saturn, we tend to see that quite a bit. And if what's coming in? Complected is apply. No, complected is no. Oh, that's a good. Let's look. Let me look here. That's a good question. Which if Saturn is complected to him, I think it just means, yeah, let's assume that. Let's just assume that, because really it means if he's joined to Saturn, and right now we have decided that if they use the term joined, it means in an applying aspect. I think you can also say if it's maybe in bodily conjunction too, complected could really also mean that. But I think probably, let's just say yes. I'm going to say yes to that question, even though I'm making myself, it's an executive decision on my part. Yes, I think yes is the answer. If Jupiter is complected, it signifies the counting involves the, in reciting Psalms, the numbers of, okay, right, because Jupiter brings you towards higher subjects and the divine. Even though, remember, Jupiter, look, we had figured out that Jupiter isn't necessarily religion. But remember, if Mercury is with the sun, he's combusted. So the sun's specific kind of, and Mercury is with the sun all the time, right? So the sun's not necessarily putting that signification on him, but Jupiter is. Counting involved in reciting Psalms and the number of divine books. And if Mars is complected, it signifies number which comes to be in the bonuses of armies, right? Mars is war, and of those fighting, and numbering the striking with whips and cudgels. And if the sun is complected, it signifies being in charge of counting for kings and the houses of assets. So what they're actually saying in this particular case is that if Mercury is with the sun, that it's really about working for royalty because the sun is royalty. And if Venus is complected, it signifies the numbering of the chords of wooden instruments and the numbering of sounds and pipes, right? Because Venus is music and art. And Mercury Venus's skill is that kind of talent. And if the moon is complected to him, it signifies the numbering of dishes which come to be for the eating of those traveling outside their home. The moon is hospitality. The moon and Jupiter Jupiter is, of course, the great welcomer, the moon as well, right? The moon is the mother. And so one of the ways in which I think that Jupiter makes sense for the exaltation of Cancer is that Jupiter represents welcome and patronage. And, Jupiter is really the super welcome. And so this is kind of this thing about eating for those traveling outside of their houses. Oh, what's the word for that? It's not welcome, it's hospitality. Hospitality. So the hospitality industry is really the moon, right? Restaurants, hotels, places you're going to sleep, blah, blah, blah. But Jupiter is that as well, because this kind of hospitality aspect is also an aspect of Jupiter as exaltation ruler. And that's another thing about what I've noticed about the moon in the third is friendliness, friendly and welcoming, right? The third, remember, is her joy. And I always noticed that when I met people that had moon in the third, they were extremely welcoming, extremely friendly and welcoming people, very hospitable people. Okay, this one comes from Bonatti. So he represents terrestrial things. So this one's a little bit more general, but it included some of these professions as well. Things by growing, and of the age he has youth and advancement in it, so it represents youth. And he signifies of works which generate the cognition of truth. So cognition is Mercury. And rhetoric, right, which is for the tongue, for he will be organized in his speech. Mercury is speech. Geometry and the knowledge of doing business. We just talked about that. He will know how to arrange many business dealings. He will get involved in many of them, and he will know how to lend them to effect. Have a thought about many matters, and he will be acquainted with matters of selling and other matters in which there is benefit. And if he were made a cleric, now that's as a priest, mind you, he will be a good and pleasing preacher. And he signifies philosophy and allegory and writing and proverbs, and he will be a good moral philosopher, and he will even learn arithmetical science. For the mercurial man will be a good prover of things. So that's a scientist, and he will work especially at that. I've got, I think, 1 or 2 scientist charts we can look at as well today. Okay, and now and this is Lily, the last one. Literary men, philosophers, mathematicians, astrologers, merchants, secretaries, right? Secretaries, I said, writers, scriveners, diviners, sculptors, no, that's interesting, sculptors. You would think that Venus might be more about the sculptor, but maybe it's the skill of the instruments that you use to sculpt. So knowledge of how to use the instruments to sculpt. Poets, orators, advocates. An advocate is a lawyer. Schoolmasters, stationers, printers, exchangers of money, attorneys. Now, this is interesting. Lily, and I think there's an earlier one that does it too. Lily connects Mercury with usury. Now, if you know that word usury is basically charging something at interest, which a bank does. So banking would be under Mercury as well, but it also has a religious connotation because Christianity, until the 19th century, Christianity, or at least Catholicism, would not involve itself in usury at all because that was something that the Jews did. That's how the Jews became in Europe the keepers of the coin, so to speak, because they were the only ones who would involve themselves in usury. They were the only ones that would involve themselves in charging interest for loan. And Leila, do the Muslims also, is there a tradition of that in the Muslim culture as well?
No, Muslims are really much against interest, like it's prohibited in our religion. A lot, that's one of the most strictest prohibitions. Yeah.
Thank you. So this is kind of, okay, so this is it's a very interesting point. Because remember, one of the terms that they use for Mercury is common. And common is the opposite of good. Because good is rarefied. Good represents the monad, which is oneness, which is a rarefied expression of oneness. And common means if you're common, you can be common to anybody. And it's something you would see in these movies from the 30s when the woman from the wrong side of the tracks meets the young heir, the young millionaire, oil heir, and his mother says to him, that woman is common. And common, which means that she's not in our strata. She's not specialized off. She's not cordoned off into our upper strata and only deals with an exclusive. She's not exclusive to this. She's not exclusive to the best things. She's common. She's touched all kinds of things that are excluded by us. And so this has a very subtle anti-Semitic connection, or so subtle, ha ha ha, Mercury, right? So this is a subtle dig at the Jews, in my opinion, and at Mercury's status as common to good and bad. So that's my little commentary on that. Let's see, exchanger of money, so that's where we started with that, money exchangers and usurers. There we go, usury. Attorneys, emperors, ambassadors, commissioners, clerks, artificers, generally accountants, solicitors, sometimes thieves, prattling money ministers, busy sectaries, and they unlearned. Right, so now we're getting into sectaries, are people that are involved in some kind of sect, some sector. And this actually, remember, Lily was involved when there was a kind of war going on, a civil war in England going on between royalists and Republican types, if I'm not mistaken. And he often was making these kind of snide comments at the other side, busy sectaries, prattling money ministers and busy sectaries. That's specific to his time period. Grammarians, tailors, right? All the measuring you have to do, the working with the ruler, the working with the what do they call it? The tape measure. If you're measuring, you're doing Mercury. If you're counting, measuring, doing fractions, right? Because it's not 6 foot exactly, it's 6 foot 3 inches or whatever, that's Mercury. Carriers, messengers, obviously Mercury is the messenger. Footmen, usurers. Colors and flavors, mixed and new colors. The gray mixed with sky color. Okay, so that's Mercury's actual color, is this kind of silver, this quicksilver, gray quicksilver sky. But Mercury rules any mixed color, because Mercury rules mixtures. This Lindsay Woolsey, I thought that was so cute. It's a kind of thread that you would weave into like sweaters and things of that, as consisting of many colors in one, right? So mixtures. So any kind of mixtures. One of the things, if you're ever trying to kind of work with Mercury, you can mix things together, or you can, if you're doing a little thing for, let's say you want to make an altar of Mercury. Well, let's do this after. Let me bookmark this and do this after, because we're getting into where we can kind of play with that. So what does he say? What kind of flavor? So any kind of mixed flavor, right? So any kind of sweet and sour, that's mixed. That's Mercury, right? Or here's a good example. I just saw this horrible, disgusting tweet where they did chicken and waffles on pizza. Mercury, okay? Even to folly, right? Mercury is that kind of folly. Here are the herbs and plants. So let's see. Oh, various color of the flower. No, let's see here. Sales can make it. And love sandy barren places. Okay, so herbs attributed to Mercury are known by their various color of the flower and love sandy barren places. We're going to look at Mercury places in a minute, so we'll see if sandy barren places are connected. They bear their seed in husks or cobs. They smell rarely or subtly and have principal relation to the tongue, brain, lungs, or memory. They dispel wind and come. So now we're talking about what you would use to help people to heal from things, right? So the kind of herbs that Mercury rules are the kind that dispel wind, are the kind that help the tongue, the brain, the lungs, or the memory, the kind that open instructions and animal or comfort animal spirits. That's interesting. Beans, three-leaved grass, the walnut and the walnut tree, the filbert tree and nut, the elder tree, adder's tongue, dragonwort, two pennygrass, lungwort, anise seeds, cubebs, and marjoram. There were a few more in there, but these were the main. There's the moneywort and the lungwort and the wood sorrel and the adder's tongue and the anise seed. So you could make a little thing with mixed colors. You can make an altar with mixed colors, put some marjoram in there. This was in case I had any people who didn't really know this. But if you didn't know, Wednesday is the Mercury day. And then this is some miscellaneous. So these are his animals: the hyena, the ape, the fox, of course, the squirrel, the weasel, the spider. The spider, I find that interesting. The greyhound, the hermaphrodite. I don't know what that is, but I mean, I know what that is. Oh, maybe it's a mythical, or maybe it's even a person that is hermaphrodite. Being partaker, yes, it's the hermaphrodite, being partaker of both sexes, all cunning creatures. The linnet, the parrot, the pompinian, whatever, I don't know what that is. The swallow, the pie, the beetle, piphineers, locusts, bees, serpent, the crane. Locusts, that's interesting. And the forkfish and mullet. Places: tradesmen, shops, markets, fairs, schools, common halls, bowling alleys, ordinaries, tennis courts. That's important. Tradesmen shops, makes sense. Markets, obviously. Fairs, right? You can buy things at the fair, and you can also try your luck at things. You're going to spend a lot of money. Things are going to come and go. You're going to meet with merchants. You could get conned. Schools, common halls. So common halls, that's interesting. Bowling alleys, common halls because conversation would happen in them, right? Bowling alleys, ordinaries, tennis courts. I wonder what the bowling alleys thing, maybe it's another kind of, oh, maybe it's a sport competition, right? He likes the competition, ordinaries, tennis courts. Quicksilver, oh, because Mercury has the Mercury has the wings on his feet. And so the tennis court, you fly around, right? You fly back and forth past the tennis court. Here's the mineral: quicksilver, the stones, the millstone, marcasite or firestone, the akatis, topaz, vitriol, all stones of diverse colors. So you could put a stone of diverse colors or a topaz on this altar. The stormy, windy, stormy and violent, boisterous weather stirs up the wind, right? Because Mercury is connected to the air triplicity, even though it represents earthy things, right? And we know about the or, but we use right 3.5 ahead and 3.5 after. And look, the countries he has are Greece, Flanders, Egypt, and Paris. I thought Alexandria, I think, no, Virgo has Alexandria, but all of these, and Virgo also has Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, but these are places of learning. Flanders, I don't know so much. Maybe that might be the weaving, but Greece, Egypt, Paris. Remember, Paris had the first important university. University of Paris is one of the first important universities in Europe. Raphael is Mercury, and then we know that he rules Wednesday. So that is our deep dive. The first thing I wanted to do was look at a chart that deals with this issue of Mercury being male with male planets and female with female planets. So in the kink community, there is a subset of kink called sissy. And sissy is essentially a cross-dressing phenomenon. So it involves men who enjoy dressing up as women, but go one step further even. Want to express themselves sexually as women. And I don't know how long it's been. I mean, I'm sure there have been sissies as long as we've known, but it's become kind of a thing. I've known about it maybe for about 5 years, maybe. And it kind of came out of the femdom area, which is when like a female dominatrixes, or dominatrices rather. So it comes out of that. It started kind of really becoming a big thing with dominatrices feminizing men as a form of humiliation. Feminizing men as a form of humiliation, and then creating like these hypno videos to make them into I'm just going to say it, make them into cock hungry sluts, and make them into porn goddesses. Basically, make them into porn goddesses and to act out as women serving men. And it's there's even like a whole codified thing. Most sissies actually put their penises in cages. So they put their penises in cages, and they usually make them exercise their buttholes and everything, and they make them into submissive females, essentially, except for the fact that they're not females. So that's sissy. And so I found this fascinating. I've always been fascinated in all kinds of cross-gender related things, and anything that is, off the beaten path. And so I have met some sissies and gotten involved with them. I haven't really done anything sexually with any, but I found this a really interesting expression, and I started collecting a few charts. I don't have that many, but I do have this one. This is a friend of mine a guy that I became friends with, and had a lot of problems with this particular thing, with dealing with it, because of course it's a really it's so off the beaten path. It's so not the norm for what a man, and look, Greensboro, North Carolina, born in the South in the United States. It's not something that would be looked on with approval. I'm sure there are going to be some people that may, if they get this far into this, that might see the video and be like, oh my God, this is disgusting what he's talking about. Who cares? But I think it's just so fascinating, because can we see it in the chart? That's what I want to know. So one of the things I thought was that I'd see a lot of Venus, that it would be, I was thinking sex, and that it was Venus. But through looking at these charts, I started realizing that it was a little deeper, that it was really more about kind of identifying on some level as female. Like, even though they're male, because there's you can go into this whole thing of feminization to where it does turn into you being female, where going fully transgender. Some people go fully off into the feminization place. Some go full off into the sex porn goddess thing. But there's just all of these areas in sissy. So what I want to bring your attention to is what I started seeing was in almost all of these sissy charts, there was some connection between the moon and Mercury. And in this one is one of the most obvious, obviously. And what I remembered was with this particular sissy, they were really, really into the feminization. They were really, really into the dressing up feminization part, even though the sex part was all, because sissy is a sexual kink as well, definitely. So they were definitely into the sexual kink, but they were really, really into, what they were really into was the feminization. And so here we've got the moon, and remember that the moon rules women. The moon and Venus are both female planets, but the moon rules, well, Venus obviously rules women too, but it's a different type of women. But the moon is really the significator for women. And so here we've got the moon at 6 degrees of Virgo. Remember that Virgo is a feminine nocturnal sign. So we've got the moon in a female sign, in Mercury sign, and we also know that when Mercury is with the planet, that it becomes like the planet. Now, in this case, we would be expecting Mercury to become more like the moon, wouldn't we? Or I mean, the moon to becoming more like Mercury, because she's pushing nature to Mercury, right? Mercury is in his own sign in exaltation. Mercury is in moon is in Mercury sign, applying to Mercury. So she's pushing nature to Mercury. Meaning that, and I think I got an answer to one of my questions from Saunders, where he was saying that if the moon is the one, if it's that the applying planet receives the one it pushes to, not the other way around. So remember when I was asking that question about reception versus distributing virtue or conferring virtue? I think that's the difference. The moon is receiving Mercury in this chart. As per what I just saw with Saunders today. In this connection between the moon and Mercury, the moon is receiving Mercury, but Mercury is also conferring his virtue onto the moon. So I think that's the difference in that Bonatti. Remember when I said I was going to go and talk to somebody or look at it? I think that's what I thought it was too, or I thought it might have been the opposite. But here, moon is receiving Mercury, so she's pushing not only Mercury's nature but her own nature onto him. The moon rules what house? She rules the 11th house. Ooh, so that's future hopes and wishes. So there's some element of the moon that's pushing remember also the pushing management is that the pushing planet or the applying planet pushes the house that they represent onto that planet. So moon is pushing the 11th house onto Mercury, who is the ruler of the ascendant. That was the other thing, is that this guy's really into feminizing. He's really into trying to get his body in a really good condition so that he looks like a real girl. when he dresses up. And so he's really into the physical convertibility. He's really into physically converting, right? And we just talked about how the moon and Mercury are both mutable and convertible. And also, I just mentioned how all of these sissy charts have the moon and Mercury, have a connection of some sort between the moon and Mercury. So here we've got moon Mercury, and then we've also got, to sweeten the deal, Venus, right? And Mercury is pushing his power onto her, right? So we've got the moon pushing the 11th house onto Mercury. Moon is a natural significator for women. So there's some kind of dream of being a woman. I mean, it doesn't have, I mean, we could see another chart and be a completely different thing. But knowing that we're looking at a sissy chart, it works, right? It works like hell. So the moon pushing this dream onto the ruler of the ascendant, onto them, right? And then the ruler of the ascendant pushing that and itself onto the Venus. Venus is ruling the ninth and what? The second. Oh, she's not this part of fortune. Look, it's also the part of fortune. Everything for this person is around this. This person is a mechanic, is in the Navy and is a mechanic, and really, really good at fixing things. And remember the earthy things, skill, Mercury. So that's a really interesting aspect of it. Look, and the Rahu there. And see, Rahu creates some kind of unusual thing. So that's really interesting. So that's our sissy chart, and that's our chart of seeing Mercury. Look, he's in between. He's on some level besieged between the two ladies, right? Mercury is besieged between the two ladies in a feminine sign. It's his sign. Maybe we should even stop using him for Mercury and use they there, right? Since they are at hermaphrodite, so they are between the two women, and so they are going female in this chart. I think that this chart will end up being transgender. Let's look at another. I wanted to look at a writer, a few writers. Charles Dickens. So you can come off of the thing if you want and talk, but that's interesting. Look at this, the Mercury. So this guy's a writer, and look at how the Mercury is on the part of fortune with the ruler of the part of fortune. That's a pretty strong sign. We know that the part of fortune is the main significator for substance, right? Is the main significator for how we go about making our money, and what our life path is around work, and around what our income, what we gain income from. And so right there's the Mercury. What's the ruler of the 10th? Ruler of the 10th is the sun. But see, everybody's always looking at the ruler of the 10th for stuff, but I never do. I look at that, but I always look primarily here, because it's almost always with the part of fortune. Almost always the part of fortune is telling you what I find is they're at least telling you what they're like at work, even, or what kind of inclination they have that makes them do what they do for work. And one of the things about kind of Dickens is that Dickens didn't spare his readers any of the ugliness. He's writing during the early Romantic period, when all kinds of flowery language and lovely situations and sentiments or sensibilities are easily offended. But he wrote about squalor, and he wrote a lot about squalor, about almost everything that he writes is about a lotus coming up from the muck. That there's muck everywhere, but there's this one kind of pure thing that comes up out of that muck, and that's this thing. And so, knowing that Saturn rules the dirt and the earth and things on the ground and under the ground, and Saturn is poverty. so this is really interesting to me. I mean, even though Saturn is in his own sign, and also Capricorn represents the rise in stature. And so that's it. We've got the whole thing there. So we've got the squalor, we've got the dirt, and we've got them rising up, the climbing the mountain away from the dirt that the Capricorn would do. I just thought,
Hey, Anton,
yeah.
I just watched a movie about his life, and he had a very problematic relationship with his father. So you can kind of see that in the fourth house. His father ended up in the workhouse.
And he did too, didn't he? He and his brother ended up in the workhouse.
Yeah, like a factory, yeah, kind of forced labor thing. And his father, like throughout his life, I guess, was sort of a gambler and a spendthrift, and like they had a really problematic relationship. He would sell Charles Dickens. He would go through the trash and find where he had signed things and sell his autographs to make money. And so they had a lot of issues.
Well, that sounds Mercury, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That sounds like this Saturn Mercury thing. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because indeed Saturn is the ruler of the fourth house, and there he is on the part of fortune, right? So he's encroaching, right? He's encroaching on his son's fortune, and but it's Saturn and Mercury are both there. So it's the Mercury, it's the thieving and the lying and the subtle tricks that the father did as well.
Right.
And also there's the poverty of the Saturn, right? And then also here we've got the significator for father, even though it's nighttime, but he's in detriment. And then so it's very interesting. So we've got this detrimented sun there, which makes perfect sense, falls low, right? So the father falls low. And then we've got the father on the part of fortune as well. Never overlook the part of fortune in a chart. Really, I mean, if I don't have to tell you guys because you've been with me for so long, but I think if you understand anything right now, and I do want to make a point about that. And I think I did it a little bit earlier, but I'm just going to say it again. So a lot of Vedic astrologers think that because we look at solar returns that we don't care, that Western astrology doesn't take into account the relationship between the sun and the moon at the time of birth. And it's true, right? Modern astrology, we don't. We only really kind of look at the sun. And the return chart in Vedic astrology is called Tithi Pravesha, and it's basically when you come back to the exact relationship between the sun and the moon with the sun in the same sign that you had at birth. So for instance, I was born on the 9th day of the waxing moon when the sun was in Sagittarius by Vedic astrology. So on that same day, 9th day of the waxing moon, when the sun is in Sagittarius, on that same day, I am also, that's my Tithi Pravesha, that's my year chart. But what they didn't understand was that, or what they didn't know about, and obviously because most Western astrology isn't really looking at it, was that the part of fortune is that. And it's in every chart. And it's considered one of the most important significators in all charts up until maybe the 16th century. So it's time for us to accept that as fact, in my opinion, now. Because look at this chart. Would we have seen it from the 10th house? Tell me, anybody, would we have seen what we're talking about from the 10th house? No. We might have seen that the father was involved with the career somehow, or the family. There was something not necessarily good with the family, but we wouldn't have seen all that, right? So that's my point with him. Let's look at Tennessee Williams. Okay, Tennessee Williams is one of 2 or 3 of the greatest playwrights of in the 20th century in the United States. Also gay men, and also wrote kind of, he's a departure, not really a departure, because the earlier important one, Eugene O'Neill, wrote a lot about seedy life and alcoholism and things like that. Tennessee Williams is from the South, Columbus, Mississippi, as you can see, and he wrote a lot about sexual deviancy and hypocrisy, and his best known films and mental illness. His best known plays are A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Streetcar Named Desire, both of which won Pulitzer Prizes. So let's look at Mercury. So the Mercury here is with, well, this would obviously tell us that there's something big, right? Mercury with the sun. And then the fact that the Mars is with the moon here. And I'm looking, yes, and there is a connection between this Mars-Venus and this Venus-Saturn. Oh, okay, so the Mars, okay, so the Venus is going to, okay, so this Venus, Mars, Saturn, it looks like Jupiter's even connected, but the Venus is kind of coming first to the Saturn and then to the Mars. I'm looking basically at it through this prism of the Mercury, because this is a writer's chart. And so looking at a writer's chart, we've got Mercury in the third of communication, right? I don't really use that, but the third does have to do with postings and written materials and papers. We do tend to find some of that. Often we find more of that in the fifth house in ancient astrology, but there is stuff around schools and papers and stuff like that in some of the third house things. Mostly it has to do with brothers, siblings. But so wondering about if there is a sibling involved with some of this, and I think he was very close to his sister. But this one maybe is not so straight up, in my opinion. Definitely, we've got that Mars, Saturn, Venus thing that is ruling this Sun-Mercury conjunction. And of course, Mars-Venus tends to be passion and sexuality, and Venus-Saturn tends to be repression, and Mars-Saturn tends to be fighting against repression, Saturn is repression, right? Repression, limitation. Mars is fighting against repression. Venus's next application is to Saturn, which is repression and corruption. So the corruption of the Venusian, of the sexual. So these are all themes that he talked about: the corruption of the sexual, the fighting against mendacity, and well, mendacity, of course, itself is lying, which would be Mercury. But the fighting against repression, the hiding of desire. Cat on the Hot Tin Roof is about a bromance where one of them finally came out to the other and was rejected and killed themselves. And so there's and Cat on the Hot Tin Roof is about the wife walking in on her husband in bed with another man and going crazy and becoming a slut and going crazy. I don't want to say slut because I'm not slut shaming her, but going from man to man, person, and also underage. So all of these taboos. There's the Mercury Saturn, right? So that's Blanche Dubois is her name, and she comes to her sister's house, and her sister is married to this very sexy but very fiery and violent, sexy guy named Stanley Kowalski. She goes to live with them. She ends up being exposed because she got into a relationship with an underage guy after finding her husband in bed with another man, and he kills himself, and she goes off, and then she ends up being raped by the brother-in-law and going completely off the rails. That's okay. So now that I think about it, maybe it's not so much. What's cool about it is we get to see what the subject matter people are talking about. This is really showing us what kind of writer. It's not necessarily showing us that the person is a writer, but it is showing us that what kind of writer, what subject matter they're attracted to. Let's do one more writer and we'll move on. Ernest Hemingway, and Ernest Hemingway is Mr. Macho. I looked for Rabindranath Tagore, but I wasn't able to find him. I thought I'd try to get and I also looked for Jane Austen and J.K. Rowling. I thought it'd be interesting because J.K. Rowling is both a billionaire and a writer, so I thought, but I wasn't able to find a chart for her. Okay, here's Hemingway. Here's the Mercury. There it is. Mercury and Leo. That makes sense. Mercury and Leo, and in the 12th. So, he was a big game hunter, and 12th house is those big animals. So is kind of big 4-footed animals, not the domesticated kind. And so this kind of feral animals. Leo is a feral sign. So that's very interesting. And there's a very feral quality to Ernest Hemingway. Hypermasculine, Leo. So Mercury. Oh, so once again, Mercury's in a male sign here. Even though the sun's in a female sign, right? So that's interesting. The sun's in a feminine sign, but Mercury ain't having that. But Mars is in the first. And look, it's in the sign of Mercury. So Mars is in the first, and so that's the kind of the thing about Hemingway is this kind of relentless machismo of Ernest Hemingway. This relentless machismo, this relentless need to subjugate the external world. Like I said, with the hunting, with just yes, this makes a lot of sense now that I actually look at it, and also seeing that that the sun has just left the sextile to Mars, another male planet. So it makes good sense. Let's see, who else do I have that would be interesting? I mean, we can. So that's. Oh, I thought we would look at Bertrand Russell, who is a philosopher. Can you see his chart? I think you can. All right, so Bertrand Russell, let's see where the Mercury is here. Isn't that interesting? The Mercury is in Taurus. Now, what would that be? Why would you? And look at how the moon is too. I don't know a whole lot about Bertrand Russell. I was looking to see one, if the Mercury would be, if the Mercury one would be important or prominent, and of course the Mercury is advancing, and that's something we didn't look at the other charts, whether or not the Mercury was advancing. It was not in the Tennessee Williams chart. It was in the third house, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it was in the Dickens chart. So if you remember, one of the things Rob Hand said was that he didn't see that the issue with cadency bore out. So that's something we should think about. And maybe it's so many of these ways that I've been kind of teaching and looking at, we need to start thinking more about ways of using this to empower, because I was really inspired by Guruji this morning. Okay, anyway, so Mercury is definitely right on the cusp of the 7th, so he is definitely advancing. So that obviously the Mercury is going to be important. But what I find interesting is this Venus connection. Now, Venus is also connected to intelligence traditionally, but I think there's some kind of necessity in this person's mind for balancing out information or harmonizing. And I think Bertrand Russell is a great humanist, if I'm not mistaken. And I should have done a little bit of looking him up a little bit more. I should have done Sartre, who I know more about, but I didn't want to deal with somebody so depressing. but I find this interesting. Yet that a philosopher is having a more, what's the word I'm looking for? A more prominent Mercury than these writers. Let's just, so what it was. Oh, but think about it. Hemingway had his Hemingway. Ha 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 ha. Hemingway had his Mercury in the 12th house. You need isolation to write, right? You need isolation to write. You have to. One writes in isolation. Tennessee Williams has his Mercury in the 3rd. So in the background, Dickens has his Mercury in the 3rd, deep in the 3rd, in the background. So in retreat, it's what he's known for, but it has to be in the background. How interesting. So a Mercury here, Bertrand Russell, who's putting forth ideas. He is an author, but he is an ideas man. He is a philosopher. He is primarily a philosopher. So I wonder if, so that's tongue, teach, and books, right? So I wonder if that's what makes this a more prominent Mercury. I mean, I'm just wondering. Let's look at a scientist. Let's look at Albert Einstein. Let me know if you can't see the chart. I'm pretty sure we should be able to see everything. Another one where the Mercury is with Saturn. Makes perfect sense for a scientist. Now, here's the thing I was thinking. I wonder if Mercury is with Saturn and Saturn is in fall if it's still good for the intellect? I guess this answers my question. But one of the things they said, what Albert Einstein didn't start talking until he was 4. Like they thought he was, I don't think there was a term for autistic, but they thought that he was that he was a numbskull, that he was an idiot. And then it just turned out that he was so deep in himself that he didn't come out until he was 4, and then he was this brilliant genius. And so once again, we've got this Mercury, Saturn on the part of fortune. And this time it's with Venus. So maybe if it didn't have the Venus there, it might not be so smart. Because once again, Venus is connected to intelligence. He had dyslexia, apparently. Okay. So it was still able to manifest. So that the fall of Saturn was still able to manifest. Because not only is Saturn in fall, but Mercury is pushing fall at him. Right? So this person might have had problems, maybe even putting things into words all the time. Not that or being understood. Because it's not mute signs, but it's with the planet that's not working well. I think Albert Einstein was difficult to understand. Do you know anything about that, Layla? If even like talking to him regularly.
Yeah, he gave the most complex theory in physics, the theory of relativity.
Yeah, well, I know that, but I'm talking about just in the everyday mode. Like, do you know anything?
Yeah, right. Yeah, he is difficult to understand. And one interesting thing is that during my high school, we had in our syllabus, we had an essay written by Einstein. And he was talking about some stuff, some general stuff. But what was interesting to note about it was that how grammatically incoherent it was.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, that's my. So I think that's the Saturn. Thank you, sweet. That is the Saturn. That's the Saturn. That's the Saturn. Isn't that interesting? So yeah, that's it. So that would be the thing. This person would be incoherent to others, would be hard to understand by others, but somehow it didn't affect the intellect. One last writer I thought I would look at is Erica Jong. Erica Jong became famous in the 70s for writing a book called Fear of Flying, which was about the sexual exploits of a woman. And it was, basically it was during the main big time, like 72, 73. So in the United States, that's when Gloria Steinem was huge and the women's movement was gigantic, NOW. And so burning bras, all that stuff. Erica Jong is one of the voices of that era. And so what's of course interesting is Venus is right here on the cusp. But where's the Mercury? Oh, in the exaltation of Venus and with K2. So on the Rahu K2 axis. So going, because K2 and Rahu are shadow planets, right? So going into the shadow with the K2, the Mercury is in fall. So we wouldn't say that this is a reputable Mercury, right? We wouldn't say this Mercury is reputable. And she's going to the square of Jupiter. She's going to the square of Jupiter, and Jupiter is in her sign. So, or rather, I'm saying her for Mercury this time, but so she's with the male planet. So we'll say his sign, even though he's in a female sign. So I'll stick with they. So anyway, so they are applying to the square to Jupiter, and the Jupiter is right on the ascendant and in Gemini rising. So that makes a lot of sense for a writer. It's interesting. This is a comparatively much less important writer than any of the ones we've looked at. But this is the one who has the most typical significators for being a writer, in my opinion. Right? We looked at Tennessee Williams, one of the greatest playwrights in the 20th century. We looked at Charles Dickens, one of the greatest writers of the English language, period. And Erica Jong is the one whose chart looks like a writer. Like if I looked at this chart, I'd say, are you a writer, or do you teach or write or something like that? Right? So isn't that fascinating? And the Mercury is in the 10th house, even. So more of an, so once again, you can't, a chart of a writer, how do you see it? How do you know it? How do you know it? How do we know this is a chart of a writer as opposed to a chart of a secretary, as opposed to a chart of, you know, whatever. Erica Jong wrote a bunch of books that were all kind of similar. They were all kind of in that similar kind of sexual vein. I wanted to look at, you know who I want to look at, because I want to look at what makes, I want to look at common to good and bad. And so what I thought I would do is come back to Billie Holiday versus Ella Fitzgerald, because we've done this already, but now that we're looking at Mercury, it makes it even more interesting. So we're not now looking for writers or for philosophers or anything. Now we're looking for how Mercury is neutral and is common to good or bad. And what we have here in this chart is Mercury is besieged. This Mercury is besieged, and she's besieged between the ruler of the 10th and the ruler of the 1st. But what I think is really interesting is that this Mercury is also the ruler of the 8th and the ruler of the 5th. The ruler of the 8th and the ruler of the 5th. And if you remember what I said about her, it's how the things that she loved ruined her, how she no longer was able to enjoy the things that she enjoyed, or the things that she enjoyed were ruined by her overusage of them or abuse of them. And also the difficulty of the life. And so look also that the closest aspect in this chart, well, the closest applying aspect is really the moon to Mars, right? Which, so that already gives us an idea that yes, indeed, the 10th house is going to be an important thing. A public life is important. We see that the sun is on the part of fortune, also highly, highly public. And then we see that the ruler of the 10th is squaring the ruler of the 1st, right? So there's a connection between the ruler of the 1st and the ruler of the 10th as well, which is a square which is tense, right? And there's no reception, which means that this can be a not so enjoyable square, right? So it can be something that starts out well and that we don't really end up enjoying, or something that there's a constant tension. And then we also know that not only is the ruler of the ascendant in the 5th house, but that, look, we've got the ruler of the 5th house involved. And so now the ruler of the 5th house, now Mercury, who's the ruler of the 5th house, which is enjoyment, which is what we take pleasure in, is in the same sign as the Venus-Jupiter thing going on here. And we know that we've talked about Venus-Jupiter being too much of a good thing. So what we can kind of see here is that there's a too much of a good thing personality that turns what I love into a nightmare for me, right? So this is the house of fear and terror into a nightmare. So Mercury is both what I love and what I love converting, there's the Mercury term, converting into the underground, into the underworld, right? Into an underworld experience, into something I regret, or into something that makes me go through trial by fire, or go through my underworld experience. And so for the person who is the ruler of the ascendant, here Saturn, the closest aspect is really this Mercury, who is both what I enjoy and what brings me down into the underworld. So we've got Mercury, and also Saturn gets to receive Mercury because he's in his own sun, he's in Mercury's sign. So this is one of those things where Mercury as a neutral planet, the besiegement, the house rulership, the square, all of those things, in my opinion, make this a chart where Mercury shows that how benefic and how difficult he can be. And of course, he might not be as difficult if he weren't also with Mars, right? So if the Mars Saturn square weren't happening at the same time, if it were just the Mercury Saturn square, maybe there'd be some problems. But that Mercury translating the light of Mars to Saturn. So it's Mercury translate. So basically the 8th house is translating the 10th to the 1st. The 8th and 5th are translating the 10th to the 1st. That's the important thing in my opinion. And also remember the part of fortune. So the 8th house is translating the part of fortune, the fortune to the person. So when the translation is happening that way, translation of light, when the translation of light is happening that way, that's not going to be too enjoyable. Excuse me. Mercury and phlegm, right? So I needed to come back to Billie Holiday, and in comparison, come back to Ella, because look up here. Now we've got this Mercury in the 10th house and the ruler of the 11th of the good spirit. So this is a good, and it's 11 degrees away from the sun. It's about to come completely out of the rays of the sun. But also note, the sun is the ruler of the ascendant, and the Mercury is in the 10th, the ruler of the 10th, the ruler of the ascendant, the major benefic, the 2 benefics, and Mercury. So common. Now Mercury is being common to good. And one of the things that remember I said about Ella Fitzgerald is that Ella Fitzgerald is an encyclopedia of American song. She even did a series of recordings which are called the Great American Songbooks. And she sang all of the important standards: Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart, George Gershwin, Jerome Kern, Harold Arlen, on and on and on, even to Antonio Carlos Jobim, which of course is an American, but her songbook series is essentially a resource. The Venus is Casimir, absolutely. Is the Venus Casimir? It is indeed. So we talked about this with Ella Fitzgerald, and that video that I saw about, remember that video I saw with her and Sarah Vaughan? She and Sarah Vaughan are the 2 greatest jazz singers of all time. And how she kills them, how she kills the audience. She kills it. She takes it a step higher than, she's with Pearl Bailey as well. She takes it a step higher than either of them in energy, in invention, in everything, in clarity of voice, everything. It's just amazing. In talent, in every single way, Ella Fitzgerald almost eclipses them in 6 minutes. And that's the Casimir. And that's the Casimir. So this Mercury is being common to good. It's the ruler. It is the good spirit, right? Ruler of the good spirit. It is the good spirit, and it's representing. And it's basically. I told you I went to that concert, and people would just scream, "I love you," and she'd stop, and "I love you too." I mean, good spirit. There's that good spirit coming right through. Always. Ella Fitzgerald. I want to cry. Let's look at some charts of if you want to put your chart up, you can to do your IMGR link, but let's look at the charts of my study, folks. So, and you can take yourself off of the whatever and make a comment if you want to. But so what's going on with this Mercury? Is it common to good or bad? Is it male or female? Who's it working for? What's it doing? What's important? So the first thing I see is that Mercury is applying to a square of Saturn. So we know that Mercury-Saturn tends to be good for intelligence, especially the Mercury-Saturn conjunction. What we have here is Mercury is pushing power or pushing virtue to Saturn because Mercury is in Saturn's exaltation. So this should be a very practical mind. And I think this should be there should be maybe even a kind of a serenity to this mind, and there's a can-do kind of personality. Because in my opinion, I think that the Saturn is being the main ruler of Libra here. I mean, Venus is ruler of Libra, but I feel like the Saturn. Oh well, remember it's daytime. Saturn is the triplicity ruler of the first 7 degrees of Libra. So Saturn is actually the Almutin of this Mercury. So he's even applying to his Lord, to the Almutin. So so Saturn rules the 12th. He rules most of the 11th, but he's not on the cusp. But he's got all the 12. So this person should be, in my opinion, because look, the part of fortune is Virgo. This person should be exhibiting some kind of skill in isolation, right? And it might be a skill that's somewhat unusual. They might have some kind of unusual skill that they show in isolation. Mercury rules the 5th, and Mercury rules the 7th. Oh, in this chart, he rules the 7th. Oh, because of the interception of the, right. So because of the interception, so the 7th. So now, this could also mean that they're involved with somebody who's older than themselves, right? Or it could be describing the person that they're with. Oh, it could be describing the person they're with. So they could be with a person who's quite practical, maybe who works in real estate, because we saw that thing about Mercury and Saturn being real estate. It's Mercury is with the 12th, is with the ruler of the 12th. So this person, I think, has some kind of talent that they do alone. And it might be, I mean, usually when there's a Mercury type talent you do alone, it's writing, but they could be, oh, you know, this could be even the kind of person who prepares people's taxes at tax time, you know, not a tax lawyer, but prepares people's taxes because this Mercury is strong and it's in the 8th house. And remember that one of the things of the 8th house was the management of an estate. So this person could manage an estate. This person could be a business person. The Saturn's in the 11th. This person might own a business or be a business person. I would expect this person to be quite good at numbers. I would expect this person to be quite good at numbers. Maybe not a writer per se, even though what? Tennessee Williams had the Mercury in Aries. Who was it? Dickens had it in Capricorn. Leo, what's his name? Hemingway had it in Leo, right? All of these, none of these signs are signs that we would consider to be particularly literary. They're not even human signs, right? The human signs are Libra. So even this person might have an attractive voice, even though yes, this person might have an attractive singing voice because the ruler of the second's in a human sign. So there's something human. This person might work for a nonprofit. Or own their own nonprofit or something like that. 1989, they're old enough that they could do something like that. So this person could have their own nonprofit where they're working to help other people. Where's the Jupiter? Jupiter's in Cancer. Oh, look, and there is that. So we've looked at this chart before, this Saturn-Jupiter opposition. And the Mercury is going first to the Saturn. Actually, the Mercury is going first to the Venus. Right? So the Mercury is pushing power to the Venus, or pushing nature at the Venus, then pushing nature at the Saturn, and Venus rules the 9th house. So I remember I originally thought this person was a professor. So maybe this person is a researcher slash professor, and maybe it is in business or some kind of business, or some kind of business administration or some kind of real estate or something like that. They could be a professor in something like that. Moonlight dream. Okay. Their part of fortune is on my sun. That's interesting. Let's see, where's the Mercury? Why is it? Oh, here he is. Ooh, Mercury's in the 6th. Oh, that's interesting. So remember, we're thinking of all the things. Common to good or bad, male or female. Who's he with? So who does he become? Who are they with? So who do they become? Right? So they are not really with anyone, right? Mercury has left the, oh no, that's not true. That's not true, because Mercury is applying to Saturn. Mercury is retrograde and Saturn is at a lower degree. So Mercury is still faster. So Mercury is applying to Saturn. So Mercury, Saturn, but this is the opposition. So that could be a difficulty with processing the information. Right? We saw the Mercury. So maybe we can think of it like this. The Mercury conjunction, the processing information is really, really high concentration. And they can really concentrate deeply, strongly, and really crack the code. The sextile and trine would be good, obviously, and The square might be, would be useful. All of these are useful, but I think when you get to the opposition, remember the opposition is an aspect of enmity and cross purposes. So it's either, and can be either or. And also Saturn slows things down. So this could actually be a chart where processing might be a little slower. And notice how the moon is with the Saturn too. There could be mind fog, things could be dense. Thanks, Natalie. I will. So yeah, those things are, I think that, and also the Mercury is in the 6th, which could imply mental illness, right? Because 6th house is the house of illness. Mercury is in the 6th house. So there might, and also Saturn is depression and pessimism. So what we could say is maybe the intellect might not be affected as much as this might be what do we call it? Infirmities of the soul chart. This person may be dealing with a lot of problems, issues and problems around, their thinking and negative thinking and depressive thinking and things of that nature. And look, that the ruler Saturn rules the 8th and the 9th and the 10th. So there could have been issues and problems with career and things of that nature, or not getting things as quickly as they were hoping to, or reversals that may have created deep depression. I think that what we're dealing with here is depression and problems with, and probably issues with mental health. Miscellum. Okay, Mercury's in the 12th, and so is the sun, the ruler of the ascendant. So there's something mercurial they do alone. Ruler of the 12th is the moon, and she just left. Not just left, but her last aspect was to the Mercury. She's void of course in this chart. Yes, well, not necessarily, because she will go to the Pluto, but no other. Yeah, she's void of course. Scorpio, Leo. 26, it should be 5 degrees. Okay, no, so nothing on the Antisha. Okay, so this Mercury, there's something that this person does alone that they're good at, I think. And and also this person is dealing with issues of isolation, right? Dealing with issues of isolation, and maybe dealing with issues of communicating as a result too, because of the isolatory nature. This is a hard chart to have Sun in Leo, right? Sun in Leo wants to be extremely visible, right? The sun does not hide in corners, right? I remember the first time that I realized, walking to school or whatever, that the sun always followed you. And at nighttime that the moon always followed you. Wherever you went, they went with you. And that was an important discovery. And so that's kind of the thing with the sun. It's about being visible, but here it is in the 12th house, which is about being invisible, which is about being tucked away. So this person's glory, I'm going to say this from Miscellum, this person's glory can come from working behind the scenes, and through some kind of skill. What I think if this person doesn't know what they should be doing for a living, the first thing I would say to them, and look at how the Mercury is applying to the aspect of Venus in Mercury's sign. I would tell this person to become a prop person or a set design person or a set builder, work in the theater, backstage.
It's interesting that they're calling themselves miscellaneous.
Oh my God, you're right. Which of course is right under Mercury, right? So that totally makes sense. Now it's interesting that, and look, the Mercury is trining the part of fortune. So even though Jupiter rules it, the Mercury is trining it. And note, it's daytime, so the sun is the triplicity ruler of Sagittarius. So this Jupiter, look, he's retrograde and in detriment. He can't really help the part of fortune, which even further, in my opinion, pushes it in that direction towards what we can't see, right? I was talking about how when Jupiter can't expand you, right? This person may have been having problems with finances and figuring out what to do. And I really think that they should develop some kind of skill in the arts working behind the scenes based on this Mercury. So this Mercury is helping the sun to shine via his skill behind the scenes. Sad face nobody. 10th house again, so achievement oriented. But look at how it's besieged between the Uranus and the Neptune. Ew. That's not fun. That's it too. Oh, well, no, that's not it. It's applying to the sextile of Venus in the 8th. So there's this Venusian. So once again, Venus is often intelligence, and obviously Mercury is too. I think this person's in business, right? Capricorn, maybe even politics, maybe even trying to get into politics. And I could see them going towards politics because 10th house is government, so is Saturn. Where is the Saturn? Or is in the 11th? So yeah, I think this person wants to, and look, the moon's in the right on the cusp of the 11th in Aquarius in a Saturn sign. I think this person wants to run for, and if sad face nobody, if you're watching this, and look at that, even sad face nobody, all of these planets are in Saturn signs. Sad face is Saturn, right? Where's Mars? In Virgo. Mercury's in Capricorn, right? So sad face nobody. Now the nobody would be kind of a 12th house thing. There's Saturn in the 12th, right? Or Saturn in the sign of the 12th. Where's the Jupiter? Okay, it's in the 8th. So in that kind of vital place, let's see, part of fortune, Venus, and Venus opposing the part of fortune. This also might have something there. I mean, this person could also maybe, I can actually see this person, I guess the arts are kind of hitting me right now, but I can see this person producing shows or producing films or something like that, or being a director of some sort. But I might mainly see government, business, government. I also see now, because there's this Mercury and this Neptune and this Uranus, which I don't usually pay attention to, and also look at how the Venus is with the Pluto, but everything is so close. And I mean, I think that there is problems with communication or with thinking. I think that there might be delusional thinking, there might be erratic behavior, erratic thoughts, there might be acting on delusion, and it may have affected business, right? It's all in the 11th, right? So the difference between the 11th and the 12th is the 12th house is a pipe dream. The 11th house is your dream for the future, but the 12th house is the pipe dream. It's either never going to happen, or it could never happen. But you won't stop thinking about it. It's like when you're in love with somebody that you can't have, right? And you just, you've been in love with them for 3 years and they hardly know you. That's a pipe dream. That's 12th house. But when you have a dream for the future that you're trying to make into a reality, that's the 11th house. And I think with this Mercury, with Neptune and Uranus, that this person is their own worst enemy around their thinking process, or can be their own worst enemy. Also, though, I think this person is highly talented and has unusual talents. And maybe that's part of the problem, these unusual talents, finding the finding the right outlet for these unusual talents. Okay, that's last one, and then I'll look at you guys. Where is our Mercury? Mercury's in the 9th. So, and look at the sun rules the 9th, and the sun is in his own sign. So, and sun's with K2. This person is into the occult, I'm sure. This person is into divination, probably reads tarot too, or does something else. But this person might even be trying to learn how to, be a psychic or something. This person is into spirituality. This person is into spirituality and religion and divination. All of the sun is 9th house ruler things. And now we know that Mercury is also divination, right? Because you got to know how to read the tea leaves. So this person might actually collect different types of oracles. Let's see, what's the ruler of the second? Saturn. So maybe not. But this person is really interested in learning how to divine things, and also possibly in teaching. Remember that traditionally the ninth house is the house of teachers and students. So I'd say probably an advanced degree and probably difficulty getting it. So I say either an advanced degree or interruption in an advanced degree due to a malaise and dissatisfaction with doing it. That's something I want to ask them. Have you ever had an advanced degree, or did you try for an advanced degree that you abandoned because of disillusionment? Because we know that the K2 creates that disillusionment. The K2 is going to create disillusionment in the ninth house, but it's also going to spiritualize the ninth house. So interesting. This is a very interesting chart for that. And look at how the part of fortune is Saturn. This person's got some good money type sense. Look at the Jupiter opposing as well. And Jupiter's a ruler of the ascendants. Oh, I see. Maybe they don't have such good money sense. Jupiter opposing the Saturn, but they're both very strong. So it could be, interesting. What this person is very interesting. And the Saturn and the Jupiter, and yeah, I wonder. It's very interesting, this chart. Very kind of, there are some contradictions and weird pushings, and very interesting. Okay, let's look at you guys. Diana. Stop the share and new.
I think someone was ahead of me. But...
Oh, I'm doing them backwards.
Okay.
Oh, I wonder if I definitely have internet, so it's just taking a little bit. Let me see if Natalie comes up. Whoever comes up first, I'll do. Oh, here we go. Okay.
No problem.
You've got time. Nice big chart. Okay, so Mercury is boom, 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 in the seventh, and no, not the ruler of the seventh, but yes, he is. He's the other ruler of the seventh, or they are the other ruler of the seventh. So this would be a good thing to kind of figure out about then, because the ruler of the seventh is obviously this Venus Sun conjunction, or the Sun, and opposed by Saturn. So marriage should have been in the cards for this person. Whether we enjoyed it so much or not would be a different issue. But there's two things going on with the marriage. So it's kind of what brings us into the marriage, and then what happens in the marriage. What I want to know is, if were you married to a scholar or a scientist? Have you been married? Have you been married now, or are you married now?
I've been married. It wasn't a scholar or a scientist.
Was he a fix-it? Was he good with his hands and could fix things?
No.
Okay.
He was definitely, I would say, a Mercury type person. He was had drug problems. He was a waiter.
A waiter? No, that's moon. That's moon. That's moon of hospitality. He was a waiter. Okay, so it sounds underachieving.
Yeah, because he was definitely intelligent and very charismatic, but had a lot of issues.
Okay, so that's this. So that's the charismatic with the issues.
Okay.
Did he have money issues?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's this. But the intelligence was there. Okay, so he was highly intelligent.
Yeah, he was very smart. Dropped out of school, but he just had a lot of self-esteem problems.
Dropped out of university or dropped out of high school?
High school.
Interesting. So see, we even have the Venus, the combusted Venus affecting the ninth house here. And she rules the third. Oh, she's the ninth. Oh, Mars is the ninth. Sorry, rules the third.
I met him in another country, so he was also not American.
Ah, foreign. So foreign
Yeah.
husband. Let's see. That's in the eighth. See, the thing is that if we were looking at it by whole sign, this would kind of make sense, because the Venus would rule the ninth, right? She rules the ninth from Aquarius. So on some level, that makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't really show, well, but now we have the ruler of the ninth in Libra. So which is ruled by the Venus. So what I think is interesting.
He was actually a Libra. I don't know.
Interesting. So that connection. And then there's also the connection between the Venus and the Jupiter over here. So, and the retrograde Jupiter. So this very interesting. So the Mercury isn't really showing up as ruler of the seventh, except, like you say, he was intelligent. And obviously you're a smart person, so you're probably not attracted to people who aren't, you know, somewhat intelligent. Now, the Mercury also rules the fourth house, which is the parents or father. Now, is intelligence / education slash wordplay or joking or trickstering or fix it or any of that stuff that we have seen, is that an aspect of your growing up with your parents?
Yeah, all of that with my father.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your father. Okay, so that's where it's shown. And tell me something. Are there any elements of the husband that initially attracted to you that were like your father?
No, not really.
Okay.
Maybe, you know, he was a very I don't want to say, I guess sociable would be a good word. Like a good talker, a good charismatic. My dad is kind of like that too sometimes.
Okay. All right. So, but not necessarily. I mean, that's what I'm asking the question. So really what we're seeing is the Mercury as the fourth house ruler in a place of advancement in this chart. So it's doing less to really talk about the seventh house, even though you're attracted to intelligent men, I'm sure. It's saying less about that than it is really saying, really the sun, this sun Venus is telling us this system, Venus, Sun, Saturn is telling us all the shit about marriage. That's what's telling us about marriage. The Mercury is in there, it's a supporting factor, but it's really telling us about the prominence of the upbringing, of the prominence of a mercurial type of upbringing, which I mentioned.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, my father is very intellectual. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. That is exactly what I was looking for. Right. So and all of the, let's see, all of the things that go with that would be important. You know, so get your education, make sure, you know, there would be value systems around it, around Mercury. You would be raised in a Mercury value system home.
Right.
All right. Can you see Natalie's chart? 22 Taurus rising?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yes? Okay, good. All right. Let's see. Okay, so Mercury, in the first, but belonging to the second, right? So both the sun, belonging on some level to the sign of the second. So it's in the first, it's a talent. This person might be good with math. Are you good with math? Right? This person should be good with the Mercury things. So reading, writing, arithmetic, are you good with those things?
Reading and writing, most definitely. Math, definitely not, but I work in finance, so I work with numbers every day.
Right. So all the Mercury stuff. And of course, and then are you talking to people a lot? Are you constantly in meetings or conferencing or things of that
Every
nature?
day.
Right. So that would be, so once again, the reason I'm talking about that is because the Mercury's in the first house. The first house is our talent or skill. It's our inherent talent or skill. So this person already has an inherent talent or skill for communication, writing, and reading, and possibly math. But it turns out it's in a Gemini. It's in Gemini, which is not necessarily particularly math oriented, but very, very much literary oriented. So, but at the same time, Mercury still brings the numbers. And so, and also the Mercury is very close to the second and is a ruler of the second, which is numbers, which is the bottom line, the money, the numbers, and she works in finance. So this chart makes the Mercury is essentially advancing. And also notice that the moon is in Gemini. So the moon's working for Mercury. So the Mercury is really the main sole purpose in this chart and working around. So when this person is looking at their future, what they want to look at is how they can expand this idea of Mercury so that they feel more fulfilled and less like a cog in the wheel. Is that right?
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be the thing, is finding the expression of Mercury. And there might be a book in this person.
I literally have said that to so many people throughout my life. So yeah, I think there is.
Yeah,
I
there's a
just haven't finished it yet.
well, oh, you're right, exactly. Well, the issue is the 12th house. And so just know that it's something, writing a book is something we do in isolation. And so it's when you commit to the isolation to do the work, the book will show itself.
Good to know.
This one was a much more kind of upfront kind of chart. This chart is a lot more kind of straightforward about.
Yeah, I was wondering about that just because literally everything is together in Gemini. So I was just kind of like, everybody seems to have a bit of figuring out to do.
Well, it's exactly, and especially because the moon and Mercury, both of whom are representative of the soul, especially the two of them are there. So it's really all about Mercury for you. So it's about finding the most fulfilling version of him for yourself.
Fair enough.
Debate. You're welcome, sweet. Debate for this chart. This chart loves debate. This chart loves information and loves debate. Loves to expound. Does not shirk from a competition. So Mercury and Mars, this person might be quite competitive. Are you competitive?
Only when I choose to be. Not like an everything, but things where I like make it. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's Mercury. So academics, if you did gymnastics, you would have been. You might have been a professional gymnast or something. Look, Mercury's right on the ascendant. How many other languages?
You mentioned gymnastics, because back in school, I got myself enrolled in a yoga class, and that yoga class was supposed to go up until like karate and stuff like that. But a lot of people dropped out. But I was one of the only two girls who lasted throughout that entire class. Everybody else, they just dropped out. So that's a theme in my life. Like when I start something in a group, the group drops out, but I'm the one who's left at the end.
So
yeah.
you'll take it to the end, huh? Take it to the limit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think also what I think this person, and we'll know this chart is right, but based on what I say, this person grew up being told to soften their speech. This person grew up being told, don't say that, don't talk like that, don't speak, women don't speak like that. Were you raised with people telling you that?
Oh yeah, my entire childhood. Yeah.
Right. Your childhood would be, that's too harsh. Women don't talk like that.
Slow down.
Don't talk like that to an elder. Speak when you're spoken to. It'd be that kind of.
Yeah.
You
don't be a smart pants. Don't be a smarty pants.
Don't be a smarty pants. Even better, right? Because Mercury, right? Mercury is the smarty pants. So this moon, Mercury, right? This moon, Mars, Mercury thing. I think we found the right chart. This is the other reason I think we found the right chart, because
this is it.
You would be in a situation where you kind of can't help yourself. That's kind of part of the karma of this chart, is being able to discipline their speech.
Yeah, and what's funny is that whenever I've noticed in my life that whenever I'm docile, like this may be a general theme, but for me, I've noticed it. A lot of people around me, when they're docile, they get what they want. But when I'm docile, it doesn't happen. I have to be assertive.
Oh, Mars. Perfect.
Yeah.
Makes sense. This chart is the right
like that. That's not a choice I have. I have to do that. Whenever I'm docile, I get like people walk all over me when I'm like, they don't see that I am making provisions. So I have to be assertive.
And see, and I think that's an aspect of this Jupiter retrograde, Virgo in retrograde. So that's the doormat. That's kind of the that's the kind of even though that's the retreating Jupiter, right? That's not strong enough to really, you can either be, like you say, in retreat, or you can be, thankfully you've got the Mars there. Right. So the Mars is action. And so Mars wants to take action always.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to sit idly by. And notice that you've got the moon, who's the ruler of the 8th, which is idleness, right? So you've got Mars breaking the idleness. You want to be idle. You'd love to sit back and let it just happen, but you can't.
Yeah. Oh God, story of my life. And whenever I've wanted to do that, just letting things happen, they've never worked out. I have to like just, really manifest that Mars energy. Otherwise things don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a question here though.
Yeah.
Okay, at the very beginning, we were talking about Mercury and Moon. They take up the characteristics of the planet they're applying to,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in this case, my Mars and my Mercury and Moon, they're both applying to Mars.
Yeah, doesn't that make sense, Smarty Pants?
Yeah, yeah. So
Right. That's what I mean. So that's it. So they're like you said, I have to act. I've been told all my life that I talk too much, or I shouldn't, or I'm not, or not talk that way, or right. That's it. They're being Mars. They're
Yeah.
being Mars, but in their way, right? And they're both the mind. So it's the mind being Mars.
yeah,
So that's me processing the information really quickly and then saying what I thought, right? So you would be the 3-year-old that says what everybody else won't say. You'd be right. You'd be the 3-year-old that would say, "Why does that man have only one leg?" Or you know what I mean? You would be the one to always put into words what everybody else is thinking but not saying, and learning that you're not supposed to do that.
yeah. Exactly.
You too, right? See, and she said Natalie said herself as well, and she's got the Mercury in the first too. I've got the Mercury in the first too. I was told all my life I talk too damn much, or talked at the wrong time, or told the truth when I shouldn't say anything, or you know, or whatever. And that'd be you too, telling the truth when you shouldn't say anything. Thank you, Diana. Foot and mouth syndrome, exactly. So that would be those of us who have the Mercury in the first house. We have to watch our tongue, right? We have to watch our tongue. We're highly skilled, we're highly intelligent, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, and also like, you know, Natalie, I met your mom, and your mom is a talker. I mean, a talker. So, you know, so I'd love to see where her Mercury and where the Gemini stuff is with her chart, because it's where you get it. You know, it's where you would get that from. So I will stop it there. But I think any questions or observations about this thing today? I mean, even observations, like what did you learn? Like did you learn something new, or do you feel like you got a different understanding, or a better understanding, or a deeper understanding of Mercury?
Yeah,
Definitely.
I did.
So you can go ahead, Layla.
No, it's okay, fine. You go ahead.
Yeah, Natalie, come on.
No, I was just going to say that it was really nice to have clarified, I suppose, that I'm going in the right direction, because regardless of the fact that Venus is my chart ruler, I've always, I suppose because it's my sun and moon, I've always known that the direction of my life and the aim and the kind of application of whatever talents I have were predominantly mercurial, had to progress into more advanced mercurial things. And just that was kind of the energy that I embodied the most. And then seeing how to recognize that and how it interacts in other people's charts will enable me to kind of, I suppose, progress my skills a lot more. A lot more quickly as well, because like you were saying, it's very simple.
It is simple. Layla?
Yeah, I think we associate Mercury too much, like not too much, but as a general, Mercury is more seen as an intellectual and a sign of intelligence. But I never really, thought about it in the sense of like voice and your how it may affect your organs and your health. It's all about whenever it's this mercurial stereotype, like this really intelligent person, but who's very nonchalant, very non-committal. So yeah,
Right.
This was very nice, going far beyond that.
Yeah, going as deep into it as possible.
Yeah.
Going, just knowing all, because that's how we get to, when we get to horary, that's what we need.
Exactly.
When we get to horary, this is what we need. We don't need his personality. We're gonna need the animal he rules. We're gonna need the flower he rules. We're gonna need the color. We're gonna need those other things, right? And I think, as you said, what for me really was really kind of separating out what is Mercury and not anybody else. For me, that was the overriding thing about this one was, like especially the illnesses were the most interesting, that they're all related, almost all of them related to the head and the brain, and that part, that, okay, now we really know. And as a result, we saw that chart with the Mercury opposing Saturn, Mercury in the 6th.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because normally when you look at it through the lens of modern astrology, it's like, yeah, Aries rules the head. So for everything that concerns the head, you look at the Aries, but it's actually the planet that you should be looking at. And if you're concerned with head, look at the Mercury.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
especially how everything is kind of intellect based. There's so many things that people wouldn't necessarily immediately think to associate with Mercury that fall under Mercury. And then just the importance of how having a functioning head, a functioning mental capacity or ability can, really mess up your money, I suppose, in terms of the fact that there's so many significations for work, different things to do for work for Mercury.
Yeah, and business. I think that's
Yeah.
in my opinion also how business is overlooked as Mercury. This
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
corporate culture we live in is a negative Mercury culture, ultimately.
Definitely.
And so I mean,
Like today we learned about that, how Mercury is the bookkeeping, while all my life, if you look at all these pop astrology blogs, it's like Saturn is the bookkeeping, Saturn is the finance and the accounting and the business. It's not Mercury. They don't associate Mercury with that. Yeah, it's really
Yeah, it's
funny.
crazy.
I had no idea. Okay.
Yeah, they associate Saturn with all that stuff, with the with, like, all those boring desk jobs. They associate Saturn with that. They don't associate Mercury with that.
Oh, because of the boredom, right? Because of laborious and
Yeah.
tedious, because of the tedium.
Yeah. But
No,
it makes more sense that bookkeeping and stuff like that would be mercurial, because you really have to get down to the right number by the decimals.
right.
You need
Yeah,
the brain for the tedium.
Exactly.
exactly. And the calculation. It's about the
Calculations, yes.
calculator. And so that's
Oh God, so many calculations.
yeah, right. And so that's really where it comes down to. I mean, even like, a lot of science is really attached with math, as physics. So much physics is connected to math, and
Yeah.
and to complex equations. And so that, especially knowing now that Mercury rules the brain, and so not only rules the brain but the intellect and the rational mind. So yeah, of course, you've got to have that working, but it can also represent what I loved about this particular session, or this particular look at it, was it gave me a very idea of the light and shadow of Mercury. What was good about him and what is fucked up about him, and how we don't always. Oh, I'll be right back. How we don't always know, or how we sometimes don't really take into consideration the bad. Like we don't really like we know people who lie, we know people who, but we haven't put it down for what it is, or we haven't identified it for what it is. And so yeah, so that is our deep dive. Let me turn off the recording. That's our deep dive.